You ever notice how the things you want the most seem to run the farthest away? We sit quietly, writing down our goals. We speak affirmations every morning. We say grace at night with hope in our hearts, and still, nothing changes. It's frustrating. It's disheartening. And for a long time, I didn't understand why the universe felt so silent. Until one day, I stopped talking, not out of anger, not from giving up, but because I realized something deeply uncomfortable yet freeing. The universe doesn't respond to the words you say. It doesn't care how eloquent your prayers are. It doesn't need your vision board, your daily mantras, or your public declarations of gratitude. It only listens to your frequency. And your frequency is clearest when no one's listening. That's the strange, almost sacred truth. Most of what we call manifestation is actually performance. We talk about what we want, trying to convince the world we believe. We journal with perfect intentions, but carry doubt in our breath. We post our dreams, hoping anyone will say, "Yes, I see you. You're on the right path." But the quantum field, it isn't fooled by performance. It waits. For the moment, you finally stop announcing yourself. For the moment, you're not trying to prove your faith or perform your worthiness. It waits until you're quiet enough to remember what it already knows. You are not here to beg the universe for more. You're here to become the version of you that no longer needs to ask. And that version of you speaks in silence. It's the way your shoulders relax when you let go of the timeline. It's the way you sip your morning tea as if abundance is already in your hands. It's the calm in your chest when you stop trying to think positive and instead allow whatever emotion is present to be there, fully, without resistance. You see, the quantum field responds to coherence, not volume. It responds when your body, your breath, your thoughts, your actions all align into one single, unified signal. And that kind of signal doesn't shout. It hums like the low, steady vibration of a cello echoing through a quiet room, like the stillness in a forest just before dawn. It's not trying to get attention. It's simply being itself. And in that being, it draws everything toward it without effort. That's what changed everything for me. Not when I found a better affirmation, not when I manifested harder, but when I disappeared energetically. I stopped explaining myself, stopped narrating my growth, stopped trying to be understood. And something curious happened. Reality began to rearrange itself quietly, effortlessly. The phone rang, with the opportunity I'd long stopped chasing. The connection I yearned for showed up with no prompting. Ideas that once felt stuck suddenly began to flow, not from force, but from clarity, and all because I stopped trying to convince the universe. Instead, I became someone it could not ignore. Because here's what most people don't realize. Your frequency is always broadcasting, not in the moments you try to manifest, but in the moments you forget to. When you're brushing your teeth, when you're walking to your car, when you look in the mirror, and no one is watching. That's when your real signal is pulsing out into the field. So let me ask you something gently. When no one is watching, what frequency are you really living in? Are you peaceful, or are you tight with fear? Do you feel whole, or are you quietly trying to earn your worth? Are you living like someone who already has, or someone still waiting to receive? Because the field doesn't wait for you to shout louder. It waits for you to remember, to drop beneath the noise, to come home to the truth that's always been humming beneath your efforts. You already are what you seek. You don't need to prove it. You only need to stop pretending that you're not. That's when the shift begins. Not with effort, but with surrender. Not with performance, but with presence. Not when you say, "I believe," but when you breathe like someone who no longer needs to be convinced. And the universe, my friend, it listens deeply in those moments. Because now, you're finally speaking its language. 1. You don't create reality with your thoughts, but with your root frequency. You know, there's this common belief floating around in the self-help world that if you can just think positive enough, long enough, you'll change your life. And it sounds good on paper, doesn't it? Just shift your thoughts, and everything else will fall into place. But the truth, if we're being really honest here, is much deeper than that. Because the quantum field, that invisible fabric of energy we're all woven into, doesn't respond to your thoughts alone. It responds to your core frequency, the one that speaks even when your mouth is shut, the one that whispers through your breath. Your posture, your tone, your presence. Your true frequency isn't created during meditation or in the 5 minutes you spend visualizing before bed. It's revealed in the quiet in-between moments. It's what you radiate when you think no one's looking. You see, your real frequency shows up in your unguarded reactions. It's there when you open your eyes in the morning and feel that subtle sigh of dread or that quiet surge of peace. It's in how you speak to yourself after you've made a mistake. It's in the way you check your bank account. Do you feel panic or possibility? It's how you stand in front of the mirror and either flinch or soften. That's the truth of what the quantum field is responding to. Not the words you write in your journal, not the mantra you repeat on loop, but that deep, subconscious current running through your body when you aren't trying to be spiritual. It's like music playing in the background of your life. You may not notice it, but it sets the mood for every room you walk into. Even if your words are filled with light, if the music underneath is tense, doubtful, afraid, that's the song the universe hears. You can say I am abundant 1,000 times, but if your breath tightens every time the rent is due, if your chest contracts when you think about growing older alone, if your shoulders slump when no one is watching, that's the frequency being broadcast. That's the signal being received. It's humbling, I know, but it's also incredibly freeing, because it means you don't have to fake it till you make it. You don't have to decorate your thoughts like ornaments on a tree, hoping they'll somehow override the roots. Instead, you go to the roots. You start paying attention to what lives beneath your thoughts. You begin listening to the silent language of your nervous system. You tune in to what your energy is saying when your mouth is quiet. This is where your real work begins. It's not about forcing yourself to think better. It's about feeling safer so that your thoughts can rise naturally from a deeper place. Because when your frequency is rooted in safety, trust, peace, your thoughts begin to match that, and the field responds not to the thought, but to the harmony between what you think, feel, and radiate. It's like walking through a forest. The trees don't ask you to explain yourself. They respond to the quality of your stillness. The birds don't gather when you yell, I love nature. They gather when your presence becomes non-threatening, when you belong. That's exactly how the quantum field works. It doesn't need your affirmations. It needs your coherence. It doesn't need your effort. It needs your alignment. So today, I invite you to stop trying so hard to convince reality that you're ready for change, and start becoming the version of you who doesn't need to explain anything anymore. Just live, breathe, walk into each room as someone who already belongs in the world they desire. Because when you do that, not with performance, but with truth, the universe begins to respond in kind. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped sending mixed signals, and in that stillness, everything starts to align. 2. Even the subtle act of performing distorts the signal. There's a kind of spiritual exhaustion that most people don't talk about. It doesn't come from failure. It comes from trying too hard to appear aligned. We've been taught subtly, persistently, that if we want to change our lives, we must prove we're worthy of it. So we declare our dreams out loud. We write affirmations in careful handwriting. We say things like, "This year, I will finally receive what I deserve." And we do it all with the best intentions. But beneath all that, something gets lost. You see, every time you talk about what you want, Every time you explain your dreams, you may be unknowingly sending out a different signal. Not "this is mine," but "this is still far away." Not "I am," but "I hope." It's subtle, so subtle, you almost miss it. But the quantum field doesn't. The field is listening, not to your voice, but to your alignment. It responds not to your beautifully crafted words, but to the resonance between your energy, your emotions, and your embodiment. If your words say "I trust," but your nervous system still flinches in scarcity, that's the distortion. If your lips whisper "I am whole," but your posture curls inward, like you're apologizing for your existence, that's the performance. You don't have to be a stage actor to be performing. You can be sitting alone in your room, eyes closed, palms upward, and still be acting, if the energy behind your words doesn't match the truth in your body. This was hard for me to realize. I used to think the more I expressed my intentions, the stronger they became. But in reality, I was leaking energy. I was broadcasting contradiction. The universe doesn't respond to performance. It doesn't reward appearances. It mirrors back what is coherent. And coherence only happens when there is no gap between what you feel, what you believe, and how you show up, even when no one is watching. Have you ever smiled while sharing a dream, but felt a quiet ache in your chest, as if some part of you didn't believe it was possible? That ache is the frequency the field hears. Because what you think you're sending, your excitement, your vision, your confidence, is often layered on top of something unspoken. Doubt, lack, separation, and the quantum field, it responds to the unspoken, not the presentation. Now, this doesn't mean you should never speak your dreams aloud. It doesn't mean affirmations are useless or journaling is wrong. It simply means this: before you express, ask yourself, am I sharing from alignment or from longing? Am I declaring this because it's already true within me, or because I'm hoping my words will convince the universe? It's finally time. That small difference between expressing from fullness versus reaching from emptiness changes everything. Because when your energy is full, your words carry weight. They ring with certainty. They don't beg. They don't seek validation. They simply echo what already is. But when your energy is scattered, when your words are dressed up hope rather than grounded truth, you send mixed signals, and the field, like a mirror, reflects the inconsistency. That's why sometimes your intentions don't land. Not because you didn't try hard enough, not because you said it wrong, but because your inner world was still in rehearsal, not in embodiment. Think of it like tuning an instrument. You could sing the right lyrics, but if your guitar is out of tune, the song falls flat. That's what your body, your breath, your energy field is your instrument. And when it's in tune, even the softest hum can ripple through the universe. So the invitation here isn't to speak less, but to align more deeply before you speak. To let your words rise from truth, not tension. To allow your silence to become so grounded, so certain, that when you finally do speak, it's not to convince, it's to confirm. You are not here to perform your desires. You are here to become them. And when you do, when you carry the fullness of your vision in your breath, when your cells vibrate in agreement with your words, when there is no split between who you say you are and how you sit in your skin, the universe listens. And it says, yes, now I see you. 3. The moment you stop begging is the moment you begin to align. There's a quiet shift that happens the day you stop asking and start allowing. Not because you've given up, not because you no longer care, but because something deeper finally clicks inside you. You remember, you're not here to beg life for miracles. You're here to become the kind of presence where miracles feel natural. There was a time in my own journey where I thought surrender meant passivity. That if I stopped chasing, stopped scripting, stopped declaring my goals every morning, I'd somehow fall behind. be forgotten, be left out. But what I learned, and what changed everything, is that surrender isn't the end of action. It's the beginning of aligned movement. You see, when you stop begging the universe to notice you, you finally become quiet enough to notice yourself. And that's where true power lives. The woman I spoke about earlier, she didn't stop taking action. But she stopped taking fearful action. She no longer moved from urgency. She no longer made decisions from lack. She wasn't trying to fix her life like it was broken glass. She moved as someone who knew she was already held. She became a part of the current, like a leaf riding a river it no longer resists. Like the moon pulling the tides without lifting a finger. And in that space, a subtle yet undeniable truth began to unfold. Reality began to shift. Not because she pushed harder, but because she finally stopped interfering. You see, in quantum physics, there's something called the collapse of the wave function. It's the moment when pure potential becomes actual form. And in the metaphysical sense, this collapse doesn't happen when you wish hard enough. It happens when your inner state becomes so coherent, so surrendered, so true that potential has no choice but to crystallize into experience. That's not mysticism. That's energetic law. And it begins the moment you stop trying to control the field and start trusting that the field already knows what to do. The irony is, when you finally stop praying for the thing to arrive, that's when it starts to. Not because you've tricked the universe, but because your signal has shifted from "I don't have to, I already am," from striving to synchrony, from hoping to harmonizing. And that shift, it's quiet, it's subtle, but it's unmistakable. Because you start to notice that your actions don't exhaust you anymore. You no longer feel like you're fighting your own life. You're not checking the results every 5 minutes. You're not wondering whether your manifestation worked. You're too busy living as someone who trusts that it already has. This is where embodiment replaces effort. This is where the quantum field starts to reflect a different kind of signal, one that's not based on fear, but on frequency, because the field doesn't respond to your requests. It responds to your resonance, and resonance happens when your thoughts, your breath, your choices, your pace all begin to move in the same rhythm. Not the rhythm of urgency, but of alignment. It's the moment when you walk into a room, not trying to be noticed, but still, something shifts. It's when opportunities find you, not because you chase them, but because you match their frequency long before they arrived. That's the beauty of real alignment. It doesn't make you passive. It makes you magnetic. It doesn't mean you stop doing. It means your doing arises from being, like a tree that grows toward the sun, not because it read a manual, but because that's what it was always meant to do. So I want to ask you something gently. Today, what would shift in your life if you stopped asking for things to change and started living like they already had? What if you walked through your day, not trying to make things happen, but as someone who understands that when you're in true harmony, reality can't help but reflect you, because the quantum field isn't waiting for your next strategy. It's waiting for your stillness, for your knowing, for the version of you who doesn't need to prove anything anymore. That's when the wave collapses. That's when the invisible becomes form. And that's when your life starts to feel less like a project and more like a rhythm you're finally in sync with. 4. Your true frequency doesn't need an audience. You know, some of the most powerful moments of your life won't be witnessed by anyone. They won't be celebrated on social media. They won't come with applause. No one will know what just happened, except you and the universe, because real transformation isn't loud. It's not a performance. It doesn't require a stage, or an audience, or a script. It requires silence, and presence, and a willingness to stop trying. You see, what you truly are, your core essence, your authentic frequency doesn't need to be seen to be real. It doesn't need to be explained, defended, or wrapped in clever language. It simply needs to be felt first by you. The moment you stop trying to become something is the moment you begin to remember what you already are. But that's hard, isn't it? Because we live in a world that teaches us to constantly prove ourselves, to show our progress, to share every insight, to keep performing even our spirituality. So we journal and post and quote ancient wisdom, hoping someone sees the light we're chasing. And maybe they do. But the quantum field doesn't respond to performance. It responds to coherence, to presence, to the frequency you radiate when there's no one around to validate it. That's the paradox. Your most magnetic energy, your clearest signal arrives when you no longer need to be seen at all. When you release the facial expression that says, "Do you understand me?" When you soften the tone in your voice that secretly says, "Please believe I'm evolving." When you stop glancing outward for evidence that you're on the right path, and instead, close your eyes and feel that you already are. That's when something beautiful begins to happen. You stop transmitting separation. You stop broadcasting the need for approval, and you begin to radiate the one thing the quantum field cannot ignore still. Grounded, unapologetic truth. You don't have to say a word, because your energy starts speaking for you. You don't have to ask anymore, because you become the answer. This is what I've come to understand after years of chasing, striving, explaining. None of it matters if the energy behind it is still looking for validation. The most powerful signal you can emit is the one that asks for nothing, not because you've given up, but because you've arrived. You've remembered what it feels like to exist in your own skin without having to justify it, to breathe deeply without seeking permission, to trust your knowing, even when no one else understands. It's like walking into a sacred forest alone. No audience, no mirrors, just you and the pulse of the earth beneath your feet. There's no one to impress there, no one to applaud your healing. And yet, it's in that space that the most healing happens, not because you tried, but because you finally allowed yourself to be. That's when the field responds, not with fireworks, but with alignment, not with dramatic signs, but with a sense of peace so real, you stop needing signs altogether. So, if you've been trying to be seen by the universe, maybe it's time to stop looking outward. Maybe it's time to sit with yourself without commentary, without filters, without trying to look spiritual even to your own mind. Just sit and breathe and feel. That's where your true frequency lives. Not in the words you speak, not in the persona you build, but in the stillness that says, "I don't need to become, because I already am." And that, my friend, is the clearest signal you'll ever send. 5. Your signal has always existed. You just need to remove the layers. There's something deeply reassuring I want to share with you today. You don't need to create some new energy. You don't need to force your vibration higher or manufacture light inside of darkness. Because the truth is, your signal, the one that aligns perfectly with the life you long for, has always been there. It's not missing. It's not broken. It's not something you have to chase. It's simply buried. Buried beneath years of conditioning, of roles you learned to play, of voices that weren't yours, but that you accepted as truth because they came early, or came loudly. You see, no one teaches us how to stay connected to our authentic frequency. We're taught how to adapt, how to survive, how to be agreeable, pleasing, digestible. And so, little by little, we drift. We take on beliefs that don't match our essence. We adopt values that belong to the crowd. We learn to suppress what's real inside us and showcase what's safe, what's applauded. And in that slow, quiet trade, we lose touch with ourselves. Not because we're weak, but because we were trying to be loved. And in that pursuit, we shapeshift. We raise our hands for dreams that don't belong to us. We chase relationships that make us feel wanted, but not seen. We silence the parts of ourselves that speak a language others find unfamiliar. But let me ask you gently, What if the reason your frequency feels unclear isn't because it's not strong enough, but because it's covered in someone else's dust? What if all this time, the field hasn't been ignoring you, but simply waiting for you to come back into focus? Because that's the beauty of this journey. You don't need to add more energy. You need to subtract what was never yours. Like cleaning a mirror, not because the reflection was flawed, but because the dust made you forget it was even there. Your signal has never stopped broadcasting. It was just masked by layers of borrowed expectation. And every time you lived a little smaller to stay safe, every time you held your tongue to be accepted, every time you smiled through discomfort just to avoid being too much, you moved a little further from that center. But here's the miracle. Every time you choose to honor what feels true, even if no one claps, every time you speak from your gut instead of your programming, every time you let yourself be seen without armor, without apology, you come closer to that signal. You step back into the alignment that was always yours. And the universe, which never stopped listening, begins to respond again. Not because you learned something new, but because you remembered something ancient. That who you are in your most unfiltered form is enough, is powerful, is magnetic. You were never meant to perform your way into belonging. You were meant to resonate your way back to yourself. And as you do that, not all at once, but layer by layer, you'll start to feel something shift. Your energy will become quieter, but more impactful. Your choices will become simpler, but more aligned. Your life won't look louder, but it will feel more true. Because you're no longer living for the eyes of the world. You're living in communion with the signal that's been calling you home since the very beginning. That's when the field responds, not to the newest version of you, but to the realest one. The one beneath the effort, the one beneath the image, the one beneath the need to explain. So if you're tired, not just physically, but spiritually tired of trying to keep up appearances, maybe it's time to stop building more and start letting go. Strip it all down, gently, patiently, with love. Peel away what was borrowed. Release what was never yours. And watch as what remains, the quiet frequency of your original self, begins to shine again. It's been there all along. And now, it's time to let it breathe. 6. The quantum field isn't persuaded by logic, but by the purity of your frequency. There's a quiet truth I've come to learn. Not from books, but from experience. The universe doesn't speak the language of logic. It doesn't care how well you explain your dreams. It's not waiting for you to lay out a 10-step plan, or to present your desires like a case in court, hoping to be approved. Because the quantum field, the energetic fabric of all that is, doesn't respond to argument. It responds to alignment. It's not listening for convincing words. It's listening for clean frequency. And the most powerful frequency you can emit is not need. It's being. You don't have to prove you're ready. You don't have to earn what you seek. You simply have to become the version of you who no longer doubts it's already done. That's not just poetry. That's energetic precision. Because when you live from the frequency of already having, the field mirrors that back with stunning clarity. Think about it. You've felt this before. You've met people who walk into a room and don't need to say a word. Their energy is grounded, certain. They don't ask for validation. They don't try to impress, and yet, you feel their wholeness. That's coherence. That's resonance. That's the language the field understands. It's like tuning into a clear radio station after hours of static dole. Suddenly, everything aligns. Not because you tried harder, but because you finally matched the signal. But here's what's important. You can't fake this state. You can't act as if while still carrying doubt underneath. Because the field doesn't respond to performance, it responds to purity. And purity doesn't mean perfection. It means consistency between what you believe, what you feel, and how you show up, especially when no one's looking. That's why so many people struggle with manifestation. They think it's about visualizing harder, affirming louder, hoping stronger. But all of that still comes from a subtle message of separation. I want this, but I don't yet have it. I'm saying the words, but I'm still not sure it's mine. I believe, but only if the world proves it to me. And the quantum field hears that. It hears the gap, the dissonance, the part of you that's still waiting to be convinced even by your own voice. But when you drop that need to persuade, when you stop trying to talk yourself into worthiness, something remarkable happens. You start to relax into the frequency that was always waiting for you. A frequency that doesn't shout. It hums. It doesn't beg. It radiates. And that radiation, it's undeniable. Because once you embody your desires, not hope for them, not chase them, but become them, the field stops, treating them as a possibility, and begins reflecting them as a reality. That's how manifestation truly works. Not by convincing something outside of you to bring your dreams in, but by dissolving the idea that you were ever separate from them in the first place. When you stop striving and start remembering, when you stop asking, how do I get there, and begin living as if you never left, when your breath slows, your shoulders soften, and your inner world stops, pleading for evidence, you become a signal the field cannot ignore. Because the field isn't moved by effort, it's moved by truth. And truth doesn't plead. Truth doesn't convince. Truth simply is. So today, I want to offer this gentle reminder. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to over-explain to be worthy. You don't need to gather more data to prove you're ready. You simply need to align, to breathe like someone who already belongs in the reality they're calling in, to walk like someone whose life is already infused with the vibration of fulfillment, to speak, not with hope in your throat, but with peace in your belly. Because the moment you stop trying to reach your desires and start resting in the knowing that they've already reached you, that's the moment everything begins to click into place. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped pushing it away with all your effort to prove it should be yours. You let it in by being still enough to become it. And the field, my friend, has no choice but to respond. 7. Frequency discipline. Steady, not intense. There's something about consistency that we often overlook in the spiritual world. We tend to glorify intensity, the big breakthroughs, the emotional highs, the ecstatic visions. We chase moments of awakening like lightning strikes. We think, if I can just feel it deeply enough, maybe the universe will finally respond. But the quantum field doesn't react to flashes of emotion. It doesn't bend for drama or peak experience. It listens for stability, for steadiness, for the quiet rhythm of truth repeated over time. You see, real transformation doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens in the silence between acts, in the space where no one's watching, and you still choose to remain in integrity with your frequency. The most powerful signal you can emit isn't the one you scream into the void during your most desperate moments. It's the one you hum softly, day after day, breath after breath, even when nothing seems to be changing. Because consistency is what builds resonance. Think of a tuning fork. If you strike it once loud, sharp, dramatic, it rings out and then fades. But if you place it beside another fork vibrating at the same frequency, it begins to sing without ever being touched. Not because it was forced, but because it was aligned consistently. The same is true of your energy. One powerful moment of alignment, followed by days of self-doubt, doesn't create lasting change. But showing up each morning, gently anchoring into your authentic frequency, that begins to create a field strong enough to reshape reality. And that requires what I call frequency discipline. Not discipline in the old rigid sense. Not self-punishment or striving, but devotion, a quiet, daily devotion to your truth. To wake up and ask, am I broadcasting the frequency of who I really am, or the version of me that feels safest to others? To notice, in the little choices, how you answer the phone, how you breathe in traffic, How you sit with your own thoughts, whether you're honoring your signal or slipping back into an old role. Discipline, in this sense, isn't about being hard on yourself. It's about being honest with yourself. Can you stay rooted in peace, even when no evidence has arrived? Can you walk as if your prayer has already been answered, even before you see proof? This is what creates a magnetic field around your being. Not one grand declaration, but thousands of small choices that align with your truth. Not the dramatic gesture of, "Today I transform my life," but the quiet, repeated act of, "Today I come home to myself again." Because every moment, the quantum field is tuning in. And it's not asking, "Are you excited?" It's asking, "Are you coherent? Are you living in agreement with your desire? Or are you still subtly rehearsing the role of someone who's waiting?" This isn't about perfection. You will wobble. You will forget. That's okay. The practice isn't in never drifting. It's in how quickly, how gracefully you return. Frequency discipline is the art of returning to the breath that grounds you, to the thought that frees you, to the version of yourself who doesn't need to try anymore because they're already enough. When you practice this kind of discipline, not just when it's easy, but when it's inconvenient, when you're tired, when the old patterns are calling, that's when something truly shifts. Because the field doesn't need you to be loud, it needs you to be reliable, like a lighthouse, not blinking in and out, but shining soft and steady through the storm, through the fog, through the long night, and eventually, the ships begin to steer toward you, not because you chased them, but because your light was unwavering. So let your discipline be gentle, but unshakable. Let it be a quiet pulse, not a forced march. Let it be a remembering, not a reinvention. Because when you commit to your authentic frequency, not as a mood, but as a way of life, you become the kind of presence the universe can trust. And in that trust, reality begins to rearrange itself around you. Not because you demanded it, but because you became too aligned to ignore. 8. Return to the state of breathing, not proving. Sometimes the most profound shift doesn't come from a breakthrough. It comes from a breath, not a breath filled with effort, but the kind of breath that says, "I'm already home." You see, we've been conditioned in ways so subtle we barely notice to prove ourselves, to earn our rest, to perform our worthiness. Even our spirituality becomes something we try to demonstrate. Look how present I am. Look how healed I've become. But there's a frequency that speaks louder than any display, and it lives in how you breathe, when no one is watching. When you sit with your morning coffee, and don't reach for your phone not because you're forcing mindfulness, but because you genuinely feel no need to escape the moment. When you walk through the grocery store, slowly, not lost in thought, but grounded in your step, as if each aisle were sacred ground. When you eat not to fill a void, but to nourish the vessel of your existence. These small things, they carry a very large signal. They say to the universe, I'm not striving. I'm not disparity. I'm not trying to become someone else. I'm already here. I'm already whole. I'm already receiving. And that's when the field begins to respond differently. Because the quantum field doesn't react to your willpower. It doesn't accelerate just because you're trying harder. It reflects your state. And the most magnetic state you can live in is peace. Not peace as a concept, but peace as a lived reality. Peace as a posture. Peace as the breath you choose when you wake up and realize you don't need to chase your life anymore. You just need to live it. And that begins with releasing the need to prove. When you stop proving, your energy softens. Your nervous system stops bracing for the next outcome. Your voice becomes slower, steadier, not from effort, but from alignment. You begin to move, like someone who knows the destination will meet them. And because your field is no longer cluttered with frantic signaling, you become visible, truly visible, to the reality you've been asking for all along. It's as if you were standing in a fog of trying, waving your arms, hoping life would find you. And the moment you sat down, breathed deeply, and just existed, the fog lifted. Why? Because your trying was the fog, your proving was the resistance, and your peace was the portal. So, if you've been asking, what else must I do? The answer may be nothing. Just do it from a place of already being from. Eat with reverence. Walk with presence. Breathe like someone who remembers that existence itself is the miracle. Not your success, not your reputation, not your checklist. Just this breath, this body, this moment. When you live that way, not perfectly, but honestly, the universe recognizes you because you're no longer sending mixed signals. You're no longer saying one thing and vibrating another. You're no longer affirming abundance while breathing in fear. You're simply being, and that's what the field knows how to reflect. So instead of trying to speak louder to the universe, what if you spoke more quietly, but more truthfully? What if the way you folded your laundry, the way you drank your water, the way you looked out the window was all infused with the silent knowing that you lack nothing? Because that's not just spiritual. That's magnetic. That's frequency in its purest form. And frequency, not effort, is what moves mountains in this field. So if you've been trying to shout your intentions into existence, I invite you to try whispering instead. Better yet, say nothing. Just be, and let the universe recognize your presence. By the way you breathe without fear, eat without rush, and walk like someone who's no longer trying to arrive. Because in truth, you already have. 9. Stop talking to the universe. Start harmonizing with it. There comes a moment on the spiritual path when you realize you don't need to keep talking to the universe. You need to start matching it. Not because the universe isn't listening, but because it's been singing to you all along. And maybe, just maybe, it's waiting for you to stop filling the silence so you can finally hear the melody beneath your questions. You see, so much of what we call spiritual practice is actually a form of negotiation. We speak to the universe as if it's separate. We ask, when will it happen? We wonder, what do I need to fix? We plead, please bring me what I desire. But here's the secret that changes everything. The universe doesn't need to be convinced. It needs to be met. Because this isn't a relationship between you and something out there. This is a resonance between you and the field that's always been inside you. Your desires aren't letters you send into the cosmos. They're echoes, reminders of the frequency you're being invited to embody. So instead of continuing the dialogue of asking, what if you made a shift? What if, rather than whispering, when you breathed into now, what if you stopped saying, I'm waiting for the universe to move, and started saying, I'm ready to move in rhythm with it? Because that shift from dialoguing with the field to harmonizing within it is the difference between striving and surrender, between dissonance and alignment, between hoping and becoming. The universe doesn't respond to your need for answers. It responds to the frequency that says, I already know. Not with your mind, but with your whole being. It's like a choir. You don't need to sing louder to be heard. You need to match the key. And when you do, when your breath, your thoughts, your choices, your presence all begin to hum the same note, you stop feeling separate. You stop feeling like you're waiting on life to approve your request. Because you're no longer requesting anything. You're becoming it. That's what resonance is. It's not spiritual theory. It's the language of all creation. Birds know it. Trees know it. The tides know it. They don't ask, when is it my time? They move in rhythm with what already is. And that's what you're being called into now. Not to try harder, not to pray louder, but to quiet the internal noise just enough so you can feel the pulse of the life force already moving through you. And once you feel it, even for a moment, you no longer ask if the universe understands your dream. You become the vibration of that dream. You align with the version of you who no longer has to wonder if it's working, because you are the work. You are the frequency. You are the fulfillment not waiting to happen. but waiting to be remembered. So if you find yourself still asking questions like, is it coming? When will I get there? What more do I need to do? I invite you to pause. Take a breath, not to manifest, not to send a signal, but simply to tune in and listen, not to the voice of lack, not to the hum of striving, but to the quiet, sacred music of alignment, the one that plays when you stop speaking and start synchronizing. That's when things begin to move, not because you pushed them, but because you stepped into the flow they were already dancing in. This is the shift from conversation to communion, from asking to allowing, from separation to oneness. And in that state, you don't talk to the universe anymore. You sing with it. Your actions become notes. Your breath becomes rhythm. Your presence becomes harmony. And the field, that infinite, intelligent, vibrating field, begins to reflect back not your requests, but your resonance. So perhaps the most powerful thing you can say to the universe is not, please give me this, but simply, I'm ready to become who already has it. Because that's not performance. That's not pretense. That is harmony. And harmony changes everything. When you go quiet, the universe starts to respond. We spend so much of our lives trying to be heard. We speak our desire. We explain our wounds. We chase clarity through noise. But the most sacred turning point I've ever known didn't come in a moment of shouting. It came when I finally fell quiet. Not silent on the outside, but quiet on the inside. The kind of quiet that doesn't need to be understood, that doesn't rehearse explanations, that doesn't wait for applause or permission. Just a simple, soft return to what had always been there. You see, coming home to yourself never happens in a performance. It happens when the pretending ends, when the masks soften, when the effort to be spiritual finally collapses, and all that remains is presence. Real, raw, unfiltered presence. That's where the signal lives. That's where the quantum field finally recognizes you. Not the you you've been trying to prove, but the you who simply is without the script. Because when you stop trying to be accepted by the world, you begin to rejoin the natural rhythm of existence. You're no longer swimming upstream. You're no longer bending your truth to fit someone else's comfort. You're no longer adjusting your frequency so others will approve. You simply begin to resonate with the earth beneath your feet, with the breath moving through your chest, with the truth that was written into your bones long before anyone told you who you had to be. And the quantum field, this ever-listening, ever-mirroring intelligence, it starts to shift in your favor. Not because you convinced it, but because you finally matched it. It had been waiting for you. Not to speak louder, but to remember. Remember what that you were always part of this field. Not separate, not abandoned, not in need of rescue, but intrinsically, undeniably woven into its fabric. And when your signal becomes quiet enough, clear enough, true enough, life starts to meet you there. People change, doors open, opportunities find you, but more importantly, you change. You no longer need those things to define your worth, because you're finally living from the source, not the surface. And that is the most peaceful place to live from, where your energy no longer screams, where your nervous system no longer flinches, where your voice becomes medicine, not because it's loud, but because it's real. That is when the field begins to respond, not with chaos, not with confusion, but with coherence, because the field is always listening. It always has been. It's just been waiting for you to stop talking long enough to start becoming. So, if you're tired of shouting for change, try silence. If you're tired of asking, am I aligned yet? Try being aligned in the way you breathe, in the way you walk, in the way you rest. Because the most powerful signal you'll ever send is the one that needs no validation, the one that hums so deeply within you that the universe cannot help but answer, not because you asked the right way, but because you stopped asking and started being. So today, maybe you don't need another practice. Maybe you don't need another affirmation. Maybe you just need a breath, taken slowly, with the quiet knowing I no longer perform. I remember, and in that remembrance, everything changes. Not because you forced it,